Okay, George, here we are again. It's 8:30, still October 23rd, 2006. So let's start at the beginning and please introduce yourself again and tell me where you were born.
Hello, I'm George MacIntyre. I was born in Manitoba on February 9th, 1922. And I've lived in BC at 3057 York Street for about 25 years. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. I used to lay in the sun on the hillside and watch the clouds go by and wish that I could fly. I managed to get through high school and went through technical school. I joined the Air Force in 1941.
Did you?
And
What made you decide to join the Air Force?
just that feeling that you want to get up there. Fly. There's nothing like it in the world. It's tremendous. It's exhilarating and clean, and it's a very enjoyable experience. And few people know that Canada paid for its war effort by themselves. Canadians paid for it. They supported a six-group bomber group in Yorkshire in England with about 35 or 40 planes, plus a fighter wing with Spitfires and Hurricanes. And they never borrowed a cent to do it. The people bought victory bonds and so on and paid for it all.
Mm-hmm.
So we were fairly careful with our equipment because we knew that the people were sacrificing their savings to help us fight the war effort. And it was, I think it made us a better group. I know we stood out as examples of straightforward, good, gentlemanly behavior. So it probably rubbed off on us, the good training that we had with our grandparents and our parents. Because in those days, you did live with your grandparents and your parents for quite a long time. In fact, you worked together usually. And we picked up a lot of good moral upbringing, I think. I get very annoyed at the present time of the demonstration of selfishness that people show in the general working of business and so on. People don't have time for other people. You've got to listen to the other people if you're going to find out where they're coming from. And I find that you get sloughed off nowadays. They don't give you a chance. And I was just talking about it the other night. On Sunday night actually, we went over to my daughter's for supper, and I was discussing it with her mother-in-law and sister-in-law, and they were quite, taken with what I said, and lo and behold, Bombo, the senator from the United States who's thinking of running for presidency, came out with almost word for word what I said. And he'd just come back from Kenya. And so it's I think it's getting generally known that there's something wrong with the the world at the present time.
Too much me, me, me?
Yeah, yeah, that's what's being demonstrated anyway. Now, mind you, that isn't everybody, but it's becoming quite a trend, I think.
George, were you concerned about the world situation at the time that you joined the Air Force?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we studied it in civics and so on at school. And we studied the Russian system, the communist system. My father was in the First World War and badly wounded. He nearly lost a leg, and he often said he wished they had taken it off because the pain was just terrible. It was like a toothache all the time. And that was another reason for joining the Air Force. If you bought it in the Air Force, you didn't usually come back with any wounds. You were finished. And so you died with your boots on, and that was it. And, but he also was quite a philosopher and recognized that we were about to have problems in the world, including Germany, by reason of the way the armistice was signed after the First World War. They took too much from the Germans to allow them to live with any decency sort of thing. And that's what and that's what we studied in school too, was the treaty that ended the First World War was not a very well written piece of work.
So you went into the forces right out of technical school, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Where did you train? Tell us a little bit about the training that you went through.
I trained down at St. Thomas in Ontario. I spent about a month in the Manning Depot in Toronto with 7,000 other guys waiting to be assigned to aircrew training and technical training and that. And I got to know one of the officers in the officers' mess because I was working with the cook. And he turned out to be the adjutant of our wing, so I got his say-so to get on the next draft to St. Thomas. And I spent from April until September studying aeronautical engineering at St. Thomas. We were instructed by RAF people who had gone through the RAF training, and they were trained so well that they could build an aircraft from scratch, you might say, and the engine. They were just marvelous people. And most of them had come straight from the Sahara Desert. They'd been out in the Sahara Desert fighting the Italians. That was when Mussolini was taking over Ethiopia and that area down there. And there was no advertising or no publicity about this war that they were fighting with the Italians. So they couldn't ship them the normal ammunition and arms that they needed. So they had to make it themselves. And they made their own bombs and so on. They flew bi-winged aircraft, two wings aircraft, and bombed the forts that the Italians had and things like that. But I can just imagine them throwing a 30-gallon can of high explosive out of an old Hawker Hind and it bouncing along the ground until it exploded, you know. It was just, talk about being down to the gritty end. It was something. But they were very, very intelligent people. That training that they had. Of course, they went into the Air Force at age 14. So they were still in school, you might say. And they'd be coming up to 20, I suppose, by the time they got shipped out to the Middle East. But that's the amount of training that they had, you know. They knew everything about an aircraft. But
So we can jump ahead a little bit to tell our viewers that you actually ended up marrying her and bringing her back. Tell us
Yes.
about that. When did
Yeah.
she come back and when did you get married?
we got married in September 1943, and I was shot down on March the 27th of 1944. So that was a kind of a rude awakening for Joan. She didn't hear anything for about 3 weeks, and she finally got 2 or 3 telegrams. One from Australia saying that my name had been mentioned on the radio. He was a listener on the shortwave radio all around the world, and another came from England, and I think one from Ireland. They'd heard a Red Cross broadcast that broadcast my name and her name, actually. So it was that was a relief for her to find out that I was still alive. And
Was that a commonplace method of communications?
yeah, so yeah,
The ham radios.
yeah, yeah.
And so whatever they heard, they felt it was their responsibility to get that information out to...
Yeah, they were listening for a purpose, to get information and to and anything else that they could pick up from the ham radio. Sometimes your signals get bent, and even though they're trying to broadcast on a frequency that's not normally used by people, sometimes it bends, and you can pick up broadcasts of the military and things like that you wouldn't get normally. And so they listened out for distress calls, because we had aircraft flying all over the oceans and around the world, and they were running into trouble and going down and things like that. So with triangulation, they tried to beam the point where they landed by cross navigation sort of thing. But
Now, how did you jump from preparing the planes to go out and fixing them when they come back to being shot down?
I volunteered for aircrew. In fact, I volunteered for aircrew when I first enlisted, but I didn't have a first-year university, and that's what you're required to get into aircrew for a pilot anyway, and a navigator. So I didn't have the necessary education, and I couldn't see spending time taking the education rather than going and fighting. So I went overseas, and I was on the various stations. In fact, we were a mobile squadron and moved from station to station all around England to make ourselves look like more than one squadron. We even changed our letters on our aircraft so that we looked like a different squadron.
Is that right? That's very interesting.
Well, we were kind of short of aircraft at that time, you know. In 1941 and 42, it was touch and go whether we were going to be able to keep our heads above water. It was just, if the Germans hadn't switched their Luftwaffe from shooting up the airdromes and so on, and started hammering the cities, I don't think we would have made it, because we didn't have enough aircraft in reserve to take care of the losses. But we were able to build up while they were bombing the cities. Now, a lot of civilians got killed in the process, but they started bombing the cities. And that's why we really got involved in bombing cities in Germany, was the fact that they had bombed our cities so heavily that we had to get back at that sort of thing. They also had their communication centers were located right in the hearts of their cities. And to get at their communications, we had to bomb heavily on the cities.
Talk about the protection of the airports. Like, you were in the airport, right? You were stationed in the airports.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How about the protection? Like, did the planes come from Germany and attack the airport?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, quite frequently you'd hear the sirens go, and you'd look up and there'd be an ME-109 coming across the airport like that with cannons blazing, you know. And so you'd climb over the blast bays. The aircraft was set in a blast bay so that if a bomb landed in the one blast bay, it didn't get to all the aircraft. And you'd climb over the hill and watch this aircraft go by you. And then you climb back the other way when he came back that way. So it was fun and games, you might say.
Could you expand on what a blast bay is?
It's a berm of soil and bricks. They brick it up about 3-4 feet, and then they fill it all with soil and put it up about 8 feet high, just enough to deflect the blast from a bomb, and also collect up if they're coming from the backside. That they can't hit the aircraft very well because they hit the berm first, and the shells ricochet off it.
Were you involved in any defense? You know, did you have to actually man any guns that were in the airport?
No, we were issued Tommy guns for protection of the airport in case there was an attack on it. But the anti-aircraft guns that you needed to shoot aircraft down were handled by the Canadian artillery. And they had artillery posts all the way around the airport with 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter cannons. The 40 millimeter fired at a fairly rapid rate, and they were quite effective. Bofors guns. They were a Swedish make, but they worked very well. We got shot down when we were shot down in 1944 by an 88 millimeter German anti-aircraft gun, and we were at 27,000 feet when we were hit. So that's getting upwards of 6 miles up, and they hit the starboard wing first, and broke the spar on that was holding the wing on to the aircraft, and it started flipping, and it set us on fire. The overload tank went on fire, and that. Our mid-upper gunner's chute, it burnt the cover off it. He was busy banging it on the side of the aircraft when he came up to the front because he couldn't get out the back escape hatch, and because of the fire. And I patted him on the shoulder and pointed to and he's holding the parachute in his arms, sort of thing. But when he jumped, the shroud line did a half hitch around his arm, and he dropped with his full weight when the chute opened onto that shoulder and dislocated his shoulder. And they found him floating in a canal the next morning after our raid.
Alive or dead?
He was alive, yeah. The Mae West that we wore kept your head above water, and they were quite effective at keeping you from drowning. And when you floated, you always floated with your face out of the water.
Where did you go down?
Just about 20 minutes flying time this side of Berlin. We'd bombed Berlin that night. There was about 900 and some odd aircraft on the raid. And I think they had some knowledge that we were going to take that route, because there was fifth column people in England that were feeding information back to the enemy via southern Ireland. There was submarines used to call into southern Ireland and pick up the information. So, but
did everyone survive the crash?
only the pilot was killed. The rest of us survived.
And you all got out of the plane
Yeah.
before the plane went down?
Yeah. I got thrown out from my position. I don't know whether the plane exploded or I just got thrown, but it ripped my uniform to pieces. Took the whole back panel out of my battle dress and tore my big wool sweater I was wearing, and my pants looked like they'd gone through a threshing machine. They were just cut in strips about so wide, you know. I think I went through the front of the aircraft. It probably got weakened during the blast from the anti-aircraft shells, and I broke my way through it because I saw the escape hatch go by and I thought I'd had it, but it peeled the helmet off my head and knocked me cold, and I woke up outside like I was lying in bed. Just, no, the only thing that you feel really is the silence. The silence is just amazing when you've been in such a turmoil of sound, you know. I can still remember that. It was just so quiet, and go off in the distance and things like that, but nothing to
You
speak
don't
of.
remember temperature, being cold?
Oh, it was cold. There was no doubt about it. I delayed pulling my ripcord on my chute. Oh, I counted to 10, and then I took a look, and I seemed to be a long ways up still, so I counted another 10, and then pulled the ripcord. And it was minus 45 degrees at 18,000 feet that night. So that's another thing the flight engineer did, which I was on the aircraft, was the flight engineer. I had to keep track of the meteorology, cloud covers and temperatures at various heights and things like that. That was all part of my log, and it helped the weather people to forecast the weather better for the next raid that was coming up. You could see where the low pressure area was and so forth by the cloud formations and things.
So who rescued you?
Well, I walked all that night. I ran most of the time. And I got into a stone quarry and holed up for what I thought would be the day. And the it was so cold that I decided I'd get out and sit in the sun to warm up a bit. And a German came up to the edge of the quarry, looked in and saw me. And so I legged it out of there. But that night they caught me. German farmer with a shotgun. And he says, "Come and see." He just took it for granted that, you know, I'd go along with him. And they took me down to the local police station, and I got introduced to the chief constable that was on duty, and the secretary, and chatted with them for a while, and then he took off to get the principal of the school, came in to interrogate me. And he spoke very good English. He was educated in England. And he said, "Oh, I fear the damage that's been done to England and those beautiful buildings that they had." So, and I said, "Well, they're mostly there. St. Paul's is still there, and that. It's been damaged a little bit, but nothing that you can't fix." "Oh, no, that isn't what they tell us." And I said, "Well, you know, there's an awful lot of propaganda goes on during the war. People say things that really aren't true." And he said, "Is that right?" You know, very gullible sort of thing. And so we were chatting away there. He's not interrogating me at all. I was interrogating him more than he was me. And we chatted away, and finally the policeman came back, and he had a Luftwaffe officer of my rank to take me under arrest and take me up to the local airdrome, where they locked me up with the rest of the crew that they'd collected up. Our bomb aimer was still on the loose. He was on the loose for about 3 days, walking west without any boots. He'd lost his boots when he bailed out. And so they, that's when I first met the mid-upper gunner again. And he was in quite severe agony, actually, because his arm hadn't been put back in the socket, and I guess it was pinching the nerves and everything else. So I raised the dickens around there. I called them all the terrible sins that I could think of. And I didn't know that the rest of the crew was in other cells. And they listened to me, though. They brought a medic in, and he fixed up his shoulder and put a sling on him and that. Brought him some dry clothes and things, because he was soft and wet still.
How about you and your clothes? Like you said, you were
Yeah,
almost
I
naked
was
from the.
Yeah, I just wore them. That's all I had. And the next morning they put us on a train and took us down to Frankfurt on Main, and put us in a prisoner of war. It was a receiving camp where they do the interrogations and that. And they threaten you and so on, but they followed the Articles of War fairly closely.
Okay.
They were quite careful, especially with Canadians. They treated Canadians a little differently than they treated anybody else.
Did they?
I asked the commandant why that was, and he said, "Well, you know, George, they take good care of our boys that are in prisoner of war camps in Canada." And I said, "That right?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "They let them out on parole and so on. You could sign parole and go and do your shopping in Hamburg or Stettin or Berlin, whatever. And I said, I know, but you won't give the British and the Americans parole privileges. And he said, no, can't do that. But he said, you're foolish. You Canadians could be out all the time. You don't need to be in the camp.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that just amazes me. I actually know someone, I interviewed someone who was a German prisoner of war in Canada.
Yeah.
And he said they treated him better in Canada than he was treated in
Oh,
the German
yeah. Oh, that's
forces.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually he immigrated to Canada after the war.
Yeah.
So he's here now.
Well, nearly all the Germans I talked to in the prisoner of war camp and the airdrome that we took over, and the village of Barth, they all said that they'd heard so much about Canada being so nice and treating the people so well that they thought they would all immigrate out to Canada. And I said, well, there's lots of space up there, so come
That's
along.
totally amazing. When did you get fed? You know, after you've fallen out of this plane, when was the next time you saw food?
Actually, the airman the officer that picked me up from the police station took me up to their mess, and their officer's mess, and got the cook to give me some food and let me have a shave and that. There's a sort of esprit de corps amongst airmen that they look at each other with respect. You know, it's they're not vicious with each other.
Did you
Sure,
know
there's-
any German?
No, didn't know a word, and I picked up a few in the prisoner of war camp. You know.
How long were you imprisoned?
14 months.
Did that bring it to the end of the war? And
Yeah, that was in, it was May when I got back to England. It was April the 4th, the Germans handed us the keys to the camp and took off for the British lines. And we took over the airdrome, which was a maintenance unit airdrome that they did major inspections on the Messerschmitt 109s there. The Polish people were in a concentration camp on that airdrome, and I can still smell the camp to this day. It's a sickly, perfumed kind of odor. But we took over that airdrome and took the booby traps out of it, the administration building, and took it over and cleaned the bombs off the runway and got it all set up for the Air Force to come in and fly us out. There was 10,000 men in the camp, and we flew out 10,000 men with the American Army Air Corps in about 2 days. I was in the last aircraft to leave.
were you?
And,
It's a long way to...
and our aircraft, an engine cut out on it just when we were about ready to take off, and so we had to fix that before we could take off. But the Russians came into our area, and we put our guard around the camp and kept them off the prisoner of war camp and the airdrome. Our officers faced down the Russian officer, so
Really?
it was. But they were Mongolian troops, and they're only about 5 feet high, I guess. and the women and men are all mixed up. You couldn't tell which was which. They all had their rifles and the same uniforms and everything else. But to hear them coming down the road, about, I suppose it was 300 in the column that came into our area, they wear jack boots with steel cleats on them, and it, oh, just that's about the speed that they were walking at.
Really?
It was quite the experience. Before that, I met I guess they were sort of partisans. They were civilians that had found guns and so on, and they sabotaged the Germans behind the lines. They were a vicious bunch of people. They, I guess there would be about 21, one of them, and he was as crazy as now, just totally out of it mentally. And his sidekick was an older fellow, and he had a rifle. It must have come from the Russian Revolution. It was about as tall as he was. And then he had a 15-year-old boy, and he was crazy as a hoot owl too. And they wanted benzene, and I said, well, I can get them benzene, all right. Ah, scoot. So I went and got the benzene for them. They said, oh, we need another can. And I said, well, there's the tank, go and help yourself. And they just opened the valve, and it's a 3-inch valve like that, you know. And the benzene comes squirting out, and they hold the can up and fill the can. And I said, shut it off, you know. No, they just walked away.
Oh my goodness.
So I went over and shut it off, but they're they're just completely out of it. They were driving a little Opel car that they got from someplace. But yeah, I met a German officer who was walking down the road one day in his full dress uniform with all his gold braid on and everything else, and I took his revolver off him. Well, he had a Browning pistol. I took it off him, and his sword, his dress sword. And I still have the sword. I didn't keep the gun. I traded it off to an Australian fellow and let him have it. But he gave it up. He didn't want anything to do with me, and he was heading for the British lines, and that's where we parted company. We had a little conversation first, but yeah.
So what was it like in the prisoner of war camps? Like, how would your day begin? What time would it begin?
Actually, you were on parade at 7 o'clock in the morning, and then they had work parties for the other ranks. Now, this was an officers' camp, so there was only a few other ranks. I managed to get both our sergeants, our gunners, up to the camp. I classed them as assistants to the officers. And they said, well, it didn't really matter too much, so they let them come up. But from then on, you might play some sports. We dug a tunnel, and we got out, but we were caught shortly after we got out.
Was there big repercussions for trying to escape?
Well, you had to serve some time in the brig for it. I got 24 days, I think it was, the commandant gave me. Now, you have to remember, our commandant was an American. He came back and joined the German forces after he had finished high school in California. He received a call-up because he was born in Germany, but his mother and father had quite a bit of land in the Monsanto Valley in California. And so it was like talking to another American, talking to him, you know. But he and I got along quite well, actually. He kept saying, well, George, if you're going to get killed if you keep on escaping, you know, and I've got to put you in the brig because my report has to show it. So I got 24 days for that.
What is the brig like?
It's just a bare cement cubicle, that's all. It has a slat bed on it, bunk, and a solid door, and with a peephole in it, and that. But it's made out of, our brig was made out of cinder blocks.
Where were your sleeping quarters otherwise?
We were in huts. There was 200 to 250 men to a hut, and they were prefabricated huts, about 100 feet long, I guess, 80 feet maybe, and there was 30 men to a room. So the bunks were pretty close together. You were pretty close to your neighbor.
Too high? Too
Yeah, too high. Yeah. And all you had was hay or straw in the palliasses that acted as mattresses.
Nothing for a pillow.
No.
Blankets?
Roll up your coat and make a pillow out of it.
Did you have blankets?
One blanket each. Yeah.
Were they wool?
No, I don't think so. Maybe partly wool, but they were just gray blankets as far as that went.
Was the barracks heated?
We didn't have any heat in the barracks. We had little burners that we made ourselves. And if we could scrounge some coal or some briquettes, we had heat. If not, we didn't have any heat. So they didn't, there was no heat at all. And it's in northern Germany. We had ice for, I guess, about a month during the winter. There was an ice rink that we flooded. And that. But it's a comparatively soft climate up in the northern part of Germany, in Mecklenburg and up there. We were just down the coast from Stettin, and the island of Peenemünde was just across the water from us, about maybe 4 or 5 miles. That's where they tested the V1s and V2 rockets. So we would watch them firing off these various rockets. And I said in one of my letters, I hope that the V1s and V2s aren't bothering you too much, to my wife. And they let that go through.
Really?
And that was just about when they started using the V1s and V2s.
So you were able to get mail coming and going. Did you get first aid packages?
Yes, we got first aid packages. It started out, we got them every week, and then when after Normandy, the attack on Normandy, the Tactical Air Force blew everything off the road or off the tracks, and they couldn't transport the parcels from Switzerland anymore. They had the Red Cross parcels, but the trains kept getting blown up. So the Canadian Red Cross arranged for a ship, I think it was a Norwegian ship, to bring a load of parcels into Sweden, and the Swedes put it on another ship and brought it over to Rostock, which was about 25 kilometers south of us, and we had to put a crew on to go down and unload the ship of the Red Cross parcels. When the Germans left, we had a full store of Red Cross parcels, and we issued them all to individuals. Cleaned out the whole warehouse, and I carried mine around with me for quite a while, because I was going back and forth between the prisoner of war camp and the airport, which was 5-6 miles, I guess, from the prisoner of war camp. And I'd lose some of my parcel every time I went through the village, because I'd see somebody that was obviously starving to death, and I'd be dishing out whatever I didn't want, you know. And but the Red Cross parcels were very well thought out, excellent packages of what you would need: tea and a little bit of sugar and jam and bully beef and lots of different things.
What was the food like in the camps that you were fed?
Well, it consisted of soup, usually barley soup, with a few carrots chopped in it, maybe, if you were lucky. And they would come along sometimes with just barley, just boiled barley. And you'd just take your dish, and we had little bowls about so big that were about that deep, and you'd go and they'd ladle you out a ladle full of, would just about fill the bowl. So it wasn't too bad. But
Were you fed 3 times a day? Did you get a breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
we used to eat 2 times a day to conserve our Red Cross parcels, because we were only getting them every other week there for a long time. When they started blowing them off the track, we had to extend what we had out, and so it was every other week that we got a parcel. So, and every once in a while they'd come along with a truckload of cans and dump them in the center of the parade square. And rusty looking cans, you'd wonder what the heck was in them. You open them up and it was usually horse meat that was canned horse meat.
Was that from Germany though?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it really started out in Italy, but the Germans purloined it and brought them up to the...
Did you lose a lot of weight over the course of your imprisonment?
Not really. I wasn't very big anyway. I was 140 pounds when I went into the camp, and I was about 130 when I came out. But so I didn't really lose that much weight. I was a lot fitter than I was when I went in. It's just the same as I can still smell that prison camp, the concentration camp that was on the aerodrome. the French workers took all the bodies out of there. They were stacked up like cordwood in the basement, and they took them out and buried them in quicklime.
Before you were there?
No, well, we were right there, actually. I got to the fence, and I looked at the electric fence, and there was bodies hanging on the electric fence. But I met one of the inmates. He was sitting on a corner on the boulevard, and I spoke to him in German, asked him who he was and that, and he said in perfect English, "I'm from the concentration camp." Or no, he said, "I'm from the camp." And I said, "What camp?" And he pointed to all I could see was some barbed wire. I hadn't got around far enough to see the whole thing. Anyway, I said, "Well, where are you from before that?" "Poland." He was a professor in the Warsaw University. And I said, "Pretty bad, eh?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "So many have died." But he was a machinist in the workshop where they overhauled the German planes and that. And I had a small section with a machine gun that I picked up at the camp, and we were going over to the airdrome. And I'd just come in the back end of the airdrome when I ran into this fellow. So I said to the corporal, "Take him back to the prisoner of war camp, get him fed, and give him a Red Cross parcel to take to wherever he's staying." And so he took him back, and the doctor at the camp looked him over and gave him a clean bill of health. Typhus was running rampant in those camps, And the next time I saw him, he was in the French workers' compound, and he was sitting on the top of a table, and he had little kids all around him, and he's busy teaching.
You're kidding.
Teaching the kids. And he
Good for
spoke
him.
just as good French as he spoke English. And German, and Polish, and everything else. But what an interesting fellow. And but that was sickening. Just heart-stopping sickening. It was just terrible. We didn't do very much. We didn't go in on the advice of our doctor because of the typhus that was rampant. The French workers, I'll give them their due. They really went in and did the job. And we dug a pit. After I got my tractor, I put a front end loader on it, then plowed out a pit so they could put the bodies in and dump the lime on. But terrible. And the Germans are so fastidious otherwise. They're so careful about everything. Their airdrome was immaculate. They must have swept the streets, for goodness sake. They were so clean. And that. But it was just before, or just after, I met the professor and sent the corporal back, that a sniper on the top of the hangar fired a shot at us. Whizzed about two feet over our head, but that was about, I guess he'd be about 400 yards away. And I blasted back at him. I just emptied a clip of ammunition at him, and took the top bricks off the hangar. But that was about all. But I never saw it. When the war was ending, it was a little more demanding because we were going back and forth to the airdrome to prepare for evacuation. And so we were pretty busy doing that, especially moving the bombs and so on off the runway. However, I found a tractor in a German farm and brought it over and tied a big cable to it and took half hitches around the bombs and trailed them off the runway and rolled them into a gravel pit, and so they were safe there, you know. And it cleared the runway so that the aircraft could land. We had fortresses and liberators that flew us out. They took 30 to 35 men at a crack, and we just put numbers around the perimeter of the aerodrome and had the #1 aircraft that landed go to #1 post, and by the time he got filled up, the last one had landed and gone to the other post, and so they started taking off again.
When they handed you the keys, the Germans, to the camp, who took charge?
We had our own commanders. We had a full colonel from the American Air Corps was our senior officer, and on the airdrome we had a major from the Royal Guards was our senior officer on the airdrome. We had a number of Rangers and commandos from the British side that were paratroopers, and they were treated as airmen because they were paratroopers. So they knew how to disarm booby traps and things like that. Apparently the senior officer was taken prisoner at Arnhem when they tried to blow up the bridge, and he and his men, that would be a company of men, it took a whole German regiment to take the prisoner. They were fine soldiers, really, really, and nice people, easy to work with. But we got the airdrome all in shape and got it lined up for the aircraft. And the colonel had been in touch with American Army Air Corps headquarters in England. We had our own radio, even in the prisoner of war camp. We had our own radio, and we used to get our orders through the BBC.
Did this have to be hidden from the Germans, or this was out?
Oh no, we had to hide it. We had 4 radios actually, and we had dummies that we put around to let them find one once in a while, so that we could use the other one. But yeah, we had them hidden. The same as we had our tunnels hidden and that, you know. It's amazing what 10,000 minds can dream up.
So it wasn't a state of chaos after you received the keys? It was all orderly?
Yeah. Well, when you're trained in the military, you automatically look for the guy with the next rank below the senior officer if you've lost him. So you keep the status quo, you might say. It's all it's regimented in your mind, and everybody expects to line up and in their own company, and the senior one takes charge of it. No, we didn't have any problem at all. There was one American who refused to fly out of the camp, and there was a jeep that came down from the British lines at Rostock and picked him up and took him back to Rostock, right under the nose of the Russians. The Russians didn't bat an eye. They just sort of ignored it, and they took him back to Rostock and took him back by train, I guess, or bus or something.
What was your actual rank, George?
Flight lieutenant. That's equivalent to a captain in the Army.
We didn't discuss how many people were actually on that plane. How many were shot down on that plane?
There was 7 of us. 2 gunners, bomb aimer, navigator, wireless operator, pilot, myself, the flight engineer.
So that was a standard complement, was it?
That's a normal crew, yeah.
No,
They used to have 2 pilots, but they got short of pilots, and they had enough aircraft, so they just put 1 pilot on and flight engineer to assist them.
how many flights did you get to go on prior to being shot down?
27. And they were all on German targets mainly. I bombed Italy once, Turin, and France twice, I guess. I bombed the submarine pens at Brest in France.
What was that experience like?
Really, you feel somewhat disconnected from it all. It's if you watch a TV show and you see the lights coming up from the ground, all pretty lights stringing up like beads, that's what it looks like. And with the odd bang in the middle of it when you can see an explosion. That's about what it's like. Unless they get fairly close with the anti-aircraft shells, then you smell the cordite and the gunpowder from the shells. But sometimes it was like a rough road that you were riding over. The shells just bursting just underneath you, and it just bounces the aircraft.
How about your hearing?
My hearing is worth the darn.
But do you think it's because of that? You know.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's from the pounding of the engines for 8 and 9 hours at a crack. I'm sure it is. But although our helmets were fairly good, I don't know. Maybe it's just old age.
So the helmets had the ear protection?
They had, they had recess, and it was all chamois lined, so it was pretty good for sound absorption. But we kept our helmets open because it gets kind of sweaty and that under some of the conditions, and so we tended to fold them back and keep them out of the road.
When you exit the plane, do you have anything with you? Do you have any emergency supplies whatsoever?
Yeah, we had money, and we had water purification tablets. We had maps of the area that we were flying over, and how to get back to England. We had a few little squares of chocolate that were high energy type of chocolate, but they weren't generally issued. It was just occasionally that we got those.
Did you have that though on your person when
Yeah,
you?
yeah, I did.
So let's go over to this uniform that we see a picture of here. But that wouldn't be what you were wearing.
No,
That's a dress uniform, I'm
yeah,
assuming.
that's my dress. Actually, I was just going on leave when that picture was taken, and that was our photographer on the squadron that took that. Our aircraft took pictures about that size while we were bombing the target, and with a stereo viewer, you could see the heights of the buildings, and you could see the street names on the streets.
Really?
There were marvelous lenses on those cameras.
My.
And when we crashed one time, I had to take the camera and lock it up in the guardhouse because they were so secret, the operation of them. And I had navigation equipment too that was secret. It had, we flew on a beam to save getting off course actually. But it helped us get fixes to find out exactly where we were at any time. And we called them G boxes. And it had a scope on it and that. It was, they were quite handy, except that the Germans could bend the beams on them. And we found out we were losing aircraft because they were fouling up the beams, and they were flying the wrong routes.
Was this a radio beam you're talking about?
It's a form of radio beam, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So not a visible beam.
Yeah, no.
Not
just,
light. It's
no,
yeah.
just an ordinary, wireless beam.
Tell us something about these decorations that we have here in your frame.
Well, they're actually.
Let me just move in a little bit closer here. Okay. What's the first one on the left?
This is the 1939 45 Star. That's the Canadian area medal that indicates that you've gone overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the Bomber Command medal star. It shows night and day flying. It's Air Crew Europe. This is the Canadian, forgotten myself, Canadian Volunteer Medal. This is the 1939 Star, and this is the Victory Medal.
What was the last one?
The Victory Medal.
So that was given to everyone after that was in the forces after the victory. Where were you when you actually heard that the war was over? You were in the prisoner of war camping, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I heard it on the camp radio that the war was over.
Over the intercom to the whole camp?
No,
or the radio that you had hidden?
I just happened to be in the radio room and heard the broadcast. But then they would put it out. We put it out on rice paper, and you got the newspaper with all the BBC News on it.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
Who did that? How did you do that?
I
mean, what are you using to write?
The fellow that took down the the news, took it down in shorthand, and we had a typewriter, and the secretary typed up the news from the shorthand, and it worked real well.
So you would pass this from person to person.
Yeah.
You're not having dozens of them.
No, we didn't, and it wasn't alive for very long. Your job was to read it and destroy it, and so it didn't last very long. It went from room to room in the hut, and was destroyed at the other end. So
that was good, wasn't it? I mean, you didn't have to feel so isolated.
no, that's true.
You
That's
got
true.
you got to hear a little bit of what was going on.
Yeah, we knew, and we got a lot of things back to England. You know, it was amazing what information we got back to England, because there's always an exchange of prisoners. There's people that are so sick that the Germans didn't want them there, and so they would trade for sick German in England or Canada, and our POW would go back, and for days before he left, we'd have him memorizing all the information we had from. We interrogated everybody who came into the camp. Nobody came on that camp without they were interrogated. We had a special room in a special hut where they were kept until they were interrogated, and they were
This is
identified.
by the Canadians you're talking about, not by the Germans.
Beg pardon?
You're talking about the Canadians interrogated your own.
Yeah, we
Prisoners.
interrogated every crew that came into the camp. Yeah, and unless there was somebody there that could identify them as being from their squadron, they were questioned.
Oh, I see. I thought you were trying to get information from them, but basically you're
No.
making sure that you're not sharing information with them.
That's right. But first of all, we identified them. Then we wondered what kind of information they had seen, because you drop in the middle of a part of Germany that's a secret area, and you take note of what's going on, how many trucks are in the area, and what kind of trains are going through, and things like that, you know. I didn't have much to add because I was in the middle of a stone quarry, and that was it, this sort of thing. But I did find out that they only worked till Saturday at noon, and in the stone quarry. They didn't work all over the weekend, so it was nice and quiet, except that on Saturday morning they blew out a section of rock, pretty near blew me out as well, you know. There was hunks of rock that were coming through the roof of the little shed I was holed up in.
Did you ever witness the Germans beating up on the prisoners?
No, we never had that manifest itself at all. We've treated each other with respect and that. One of the guards, Captain Hoffman, was an Austrian, and he bred dogs, and he was most annoyed with the Germans because they killed all his dogs, all his breeding dogs. So he was not very with it for Germany. He looked after us better than he would look after the German. Anyway, he invited me one day to go to a birthday party that they were going to have on the beach. And we had a beautiful beach just outside the camp on the Baltic Sea. It was a real nice golden sandy beach, you know. And he said, we're going to have a party tonight, and some of the girls are coming from the artillery school, which was right next door to us. And I said, well, good luck, you know. He said, why don't you sign parole and come out with enjoy yourself? And I said, no, you won't give parole to anybody else, so you know, why me? And so he went to the party, and he came back. He said, "Oh, you should have gone, George. The wine was good, everything was good," he said, "and the girls were great." And I said, "Yeah, I can believe it." But I enjoyed visiting with him. He was a real down-to-earth individual.
Was there any singing that went on at in the camp?
Big
You
part.
know, was there any singing, any dancing in the
We
camp?
put on regular windmill shows. We put on dancing girls and full plays, and we had a real good orchestra, and so we had quite good entertainment. In fact, the Germans enjoyed it as much as we did. They used to come into the concerts when we put them on, things like that.
Were there women in the camp?
No.
No.
But some of the guys looked real nice when they were dressed up. And they were good dancers too. Yeah.
So you talked about sports. What kind of sports did you play in camp?
Played baseball, football, touch rugby, soccer, and what were some of the other ones? There was 3 or 4 other obscure games that I had never heard of before. I think they were dreamed up by the Norwegians. We had a number of Norwegians in the camp with us. And we had a full regiment of tank drivers from the Russian army in the camp. They were in a separate compound. The Americans had their own compound. The British and Canadians and so on had their own compound. And there was about 4,000, I guess, Canadians, Australians, South Africans, Rhodesians, New Zealanders in our compound.
Mm-hmm.
I was in charge of a 250-man hut, and when you went out on parade in the morning at 7 o'clock, I stood out in front of my hut and answered the roll call, sort of thing. But they did a full count on us twice a day. We had another one in the evening. We had to line up for a count. And if anybody was missing, they would do a full search of the camp to start out with, and they would lock us all into the parade square, which was surrounded by barbed wire. They decided to renew the fence around the parade square one time, and they took out all the posts and all the barbed wire and everything on this section of fence they were going to rebuild, roll the wire up nice and neatly and stack the posts up. And we were on parade. We broke off parade. When the fellows finished walking past that fence, there was no fence left. The whole thing had disappeared. The Germans lost, occasionally they'd lose their Lugers, their rifles. It was amazing the arsenal we had by the time the war ended.
Mm.
We had a number of good knives and...
Where were you hiding all of this?
well, between floorboards and walls in some of the huts. They were, the way they were built, they just asked for something to be stashed in them, you know?
Mm. Mm.
And we kind of camouflaged some of the areas too. But it was.
Did the Germans try and do any brainwashing of you during this period of time that you were incarcerated?
No, no. When we were first shot down and they interrogated us at the interrogation center, they try to brainstorm you and sort of scare the bejeebers out of you. But
Did it work?
no, not really. We just were required to give them our name, rank, and number, and that was it. And so we did. I went out, and the airman that picked me up to take me into the airdrome after we were shot down asked me to go with him out to the soccer field of the village that we were in. And I didn't realize what he was getting at, but we got out there and our aircraft was in the middle of the soccer field, and the pilot was dead inside. So he said, you know, there's an airman in there that's dead, but we don't have any identification for him to advise his next of kin. And I said, oh, we all carry identification. You either have dog tags around your neck or something. And so when I went and looked, I knew that we all put in indelible ink our name, rank, and number in our battle jackets, because you wanted to make sure you got your own back from the laundry, you know. And so I undid this battle jacket and said, "Das ist." And he said, oh. He said, "You're hard people. You're aircraft, but you won't admit it." And I said, "Oh, I don't know about being hard. It's just what you have to do under the circumstances. That's the thing." And I often wonder, you know, how it would turn out. Apparently, it's working quite well with the troops that are in Afghanistan. They're holding up their end very well, because it's a tough job they've got, and they don't have enough to make it work, really. So you're like a lost sheep in a pasture that's full of wolves. It's kind of hard to imagine yourself in those conditions.
When the war was over, did you leave the services then?
Yeah, so I spent some time in Deer Lodge Hospital with I had ulcers, and my nerves were a little more shot than I thought they were. And I spent about a month in the hospital, and then I was on sick leave for about 2 months, I guess. And I got a chance to work with Veterans Affairs on rehabilitation. And, well, I knew the superintendent, and he talked me into helping him out, because he was snowed under with applications and people and that. So I did. I took up the job. It was just a clerk's job, but it got me back into the swing of things. I had 40-odd years with the Veterans Affairs before I retired. But
does that affect you for years later if you hear a loud noise or something? You know?
Yeah, it's a post-traumatic syndrome. You know, the mind is funny. It never forgets anything. And I often wondered what effect it would have on us, because we had fellows that were killed right by your shoulder. And you wonder, what the dickens did he get shot? Why wasn't it me? I mean, the guy's looking at the two of us. But you wonder. And I think post-traumatic syndrome is a real problem. And I think not only for the military, but for the civilians as well. I'm sure that people that have been shocked by various things that have happened, vicious attacks and things like that, suffer for the rest of their life. I often jump up in bed and I literally throw myself into the air, you know. I guess I'm dodging something that I dodged during the service. I don't know what it is. But I jumped out of bed the other night and, well, about 2 weeks ago, and I hit the bedside table and took a big peel of skin off my arm, and that's really what happened. I guess I dreamed or something, but you don't seem to remember them. They just flash across your mind and cause the dream, and that's it.
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? I know my aunt used to wake up and her husband, who was in the Seaforth, what do they call the ones that did the pipes?
Oh, yeah.
He would be strangling her,
Yeah.
you know, in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Yeah.
She couldn't sleep for years and years. And
Well, Joan and I had to get separate beds because I would lash out at night, and I hit her one night, and boy, oh boy, raised a bruise. So I said, no, I've had enough of that. I'm going to go down and order a bed of my own, and so we can, you can sleep comfortably. Because before that, she'd often shout at me, you know, and wake me up, and I'd wake up and say, well, what's the matter? What's the matter? You know?
mm-hmm.
Well, you were at it again. You were cussing somebody out.
Yeah. But it wasn't the prisoner of war camp, though, you don't think? You think it was more the actual battle and seeing these people?
Well, you know, I was just thinking the other day, actually. There was 24 of us that went into aircrew training at St. Athens in South Wales. And at the end of 8 months, I was the only one left in operations. The rest of them had all been shot down or killed in crashes.
Yeah.
And that makes you think, where did my number go, you know, sort of thing. Because, but it starts to get to you. I know when I was on the last trip, I wasn't as steady as I was when I started out in the, of course I had a little more responsibility because I had the section I had to look after, and they never allowed it again. Our crew consisted of the B flight commander, who was the navigator, the wireless op was the wireless leader. He had 35 men under his command. He was a flight lieutenant. And the bomb aimer was on his last flight. He was a warrant officer. The pilot had walked back from Belgium once before via Spain. He said the worst part was the Spanish jails. They were lousy as anything, and he got, our two gunners were right from the training school. So we had this crew. I was the flight engineer leader, so we had all those leaders that were bought on one trip. And it just stopped the squadron. It stops the squadron dead, right in its tracks.
Right. So do you usually go to the Remembrance Day services then?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
We always have one, the Port Moody Power and Sail Squadron at Belcarra every year.
Mm-hmm.
And we put a wreath on the water.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the planes fly over. We know John Northey, and so he's a member of the squadron.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So he flies his plane over for us.
Yeah.
They try to fly past as many as they possibly can, you know,
Yeah.
the ceremonies. Yeah.
Yeah. They're,
So
they
do you ever have reunions with some of the people that you actually, were in the prisoner of war camp?
I've been to a number of reunions. 408 Squadron was the first bomber squadron I was on. I've been to their reunion twice, I think. And 411 Squadron was the fighter squadron that I was a ground crew on. And I've been to 3 reunions that they've had. 427 Squadron, I've been to 2 of their reunions. And 429 Squadron, I've been to 1 reunion there. So but you know, I found it depressing.
Did you?
Yeah. It was actually the people that were missing that depressed me.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people that go to reunions are people that came in after the fact, sort of thing. Sure, they were part of the squadron, and a lot of them are in the because the squadrons are still active. They've been they're young fellows, you know. I put myself in their place 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But I find it quite depressing at times. And the illnesses that some of them have had to suffer, strokes and things like that, in wheelchairs and things. And you feel kind of out of place going up to them and talking to them, you know. They're always glad to see you, but it's amazing how much they haven't changed too. You can look out over the crowd and you can say, oh yeah, there's Hawker and there's so and say, you know, they just like you're seeing them yesterday. But yeah, it's good, I think. The exchange of that you hear, they get quite philosophical in there, especially after they've had a few drinks. And but it's fun and games again. It's quite good. We had one up at Kelowna, 427 Squadron had a reunion up there, and it was nice and handy. I went down to the...
Well, I guess it never got out of your mind totally if you worked for Veterans Affairs.
No, that's right.
I mean, it's always alive, isn't it?
Right, it's getting renewed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were hearing not only the experiences you'd gone through, but other experiences that people had, especially the people in the Army and the Navy. You know, I got quite an education in listening to their view of the whole thing, which was a lot rougher than my view was. That's why they called us the Brill Cream Boys. We always got dressed up and so on to go fighting, and you know, it's but it's amazing how they think the same way. The people that were flyers, you can pick them out of a crowd almost. You know, they have that, I don't know what it is, it's an attitude or something, self-confidence. I think that's what you find mostly is total self-confidence that nothing can beat them, sort of thing.
Even when they were flying and they knew that the odds weren't good, were they?
Oh,
The odds were
they were
bad.
pretty bad. Yeah, yeah. You know, the chance of finishing a tour of duty, which was 30 trips, was very, very slim. You could almost count on one hand the people that would achieve it in a squadron, and that's about close to 1,000 men. Not all airmen, but a lot of them are.
Mm-hmm. Well, have we learned anything from all these wars?
I often wonder. I was just philosophical about the whole thing when I was watching the political situation. And what have they got us into again, sort of thing. You know, wars start out as little things and they grow into unmanageable holocausts, actually. So I don't know whether we've achieved anything or not. The next generation maybe just make the same mistakes we made. And it's gradually seems to be shaping up that way. We have an enemy, and if you have an enemy, you've got to fight, and that's all there is to it.
If you had your life to live over again, would you have joined the forces?
Oh yeah, my life turned out exactly the way I expected it to. Exactly. Even to the time frames. Laying on my back on the prairie, watching the clouds go by. I used to visualize what I was going to do and how I was going to do it and when and everything else, and it's worked out just about exactly the way I anticipated.
How are you in British Columbia when you cannot see the sky the same way that you can on the prairies?
It bothers me, you know. It bothers me that I can't see the horizon. I enjoy getting down to the coast where I can see the horizon and that. Yeah, there's something about the mountains that sort of actually it depressed me when I first moved out. Didn't have enough sunlight, you know, and like growing up on the prairie, it was nothing to have 110 degrees temperature, and you knew that you were going to get really blasted with a terrible storm. And the lightning is something else on the prairies. When you're laying on your back on the prairie and you're watching the lightning dancing around, you can smell it. You know, and I can still smell the fresh lightning and the grass in the rain.